Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've always thought that cabin doors are the border between two worlds. On one side, the public corridor, with its tacky carpet and piped music. On the other, a private universe that changes every 7 days. My job as a steward at Liberty of the Seas was to have the key to all of them, but with one golden rule: never, ever really look inside. You make the bed, change the towels, and ignore the evidence of people's lives. My name is Daniel, and I broke that rule. I was in charge of the 9th floor, B wing. Cabin 9214 was different. The guest was a single, middle-aged man who checked in as Mr. Jones. He was polite but cold, and he kept the Do Not Disturb sign on the door most of the time. He would ask me to leave clean towels outside. This wasn't all that unusual. What was strange was the sound. Sometimes, as I walked by, I would hear a noise from inside. A soft cry, quickly muffled, or a dull thud, like something falling. I told myself it was the TV or the noise from the cabin next door. The lie I had been telling myself ended on the 4th night. Mr. Jones ordered room service. For the first time, he opened the door to get the tray. And in that brief moment, before he closed the door in my face, I saw it. Behind him, in the darkness of the room, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her eyes were huge and terrified. Mr. Jones was the only passenger registered for that cabin. My blood ran cold. The next day, my suspicion became certainty. I found a folded piece of paper on the floor of the hallway near his door. Inside was a child's drawing drawn with crayon. It was of a long-haired girl trapped in a cage with a crying son in the corner of the page. I took the drawing to my superior, a man named Peters. He looked at the paper, then back at me. His expression one of pure boredom. Children draw pictures, Daniel. The man is probably with his daughter. Sometimes the registration system fails. He took the drawing and tossed it into the trash can next to his desk. Get back to work and don't bother the guests. The message was clear. The matter was closed. I felt like an idiot. But the girl's face, I couldn't forget it. I decided to go higher up the chain of command, and I spoke to the head of security, an ex-Boston cop named, what was his name? A guy with a scar on his cheek. Mr. McCarthy. That's right, McCarthy. He listened to me, but his eyes were blank. He promised to check it out. No one ever checked anything. That night, I knew I was alone. The system would not help. Their indifference was more frightening than Mr. Burke's coldness. It was complicity. I follow Edmund Burke's thought. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And there, in the middle of the ocean, the only good man who knew anything was a steward who earned next to nothing an hour. The responsibility was a crushing weight. I made the worst decision of my life. I waited until I heard that Mr. Jones was doing a magic show at the main theater. With shaking hands, I used my MasterCard and entered booth 9214. The air was thick with a strange, sweet smell. The room looked normal, except for one thing. In the corner sat a large suitcase, the kind with rigid frames and makeshift air vents drilled into the side. It was locked with an industrial-strength padlock. I walked closer and heard a faint sound coming from inside. A scratch, then another. There was someone inside. I was in total panic. I was about to try to break the lock when I heard the sound that every employee dreads. The click of the access card in the door. He was back. Without thinking, I dove into the bathroom and closed the door slowly, leaving just a crack to peek through. Mr. Jones came in. He did not turn on the light. He walked over to the suitcase and slammed it down hard. "I told you to be quiet," he growled, his voice low and full of venom. "Not long now. If you cost me this job, I'll throw you overboard." Then he dragged an armchair over, sat down opposite the cabin door, and stood there, silent in the darkness, like a guard. I was trapped in the bathroom for hours, barely breathing, terror paralyzing me. I was just feet away from a child being tortured and a monster watching over her. And I couldn't do anything. Eventually, he got a phone call and stepped out into the hallway for a moment. That was my chance. I escaped the stall and ran to my own room, where I stayed until dawn, shaking. The next day, the ship docked. From my post, I watched Mr. Jones disembark. He did not carry the large suitcase. Other men, dressed as stevedores, did it for him with quick and unobtrusive efficiency. They passed through security without any problems. I tell myself there was nothing I could have done, that I was just a scared kid. But the truth is, a poison I drink every night before I go to sleep. I had one chance to scream, to make a fuss, to maybe save that girl. And I chose my own neck. The real terror, the terror that makes my skin crawl, is not the evil that men like Mr. Jones do. It is the silence that men like me buy, so they can go on living. I thought working as a nurse on a cruise ship would be 90% boredom and 10% real panic. The truth, I discovered, is that it's 99% sun drinking and 1% a buffet knife cut that needs a Band-Aid. My name is Elena, and after 2 years in the emergency room of a Chicago hospital, sovereign dream. It felt like a paid vacation. The ocean, the salty air, and the most seriously ill patients complaining of heartburn. At least that's what I thought. The ship was on the 4th day of a 10-day voyage around the Caribbean when she first appeared. It was late, almost 1 in the morning, and the sick bay was silent except for the hum of the minibar. An elderly woman with thin white hair entered slowly. She wore a faded silk robe and worn slippers. "Can I help you?" I asked, getting up from my chair. "I feel cold," she said, her voice as thin as paper, a cold that comes from within. Her name, she said, was Mrs. Gable. I checked her vital signs. Blood pressure normal, temperature normal, pulse steady. There was nothing clinically wrong with her. I offered her an extra blanket and suggested that perhaps the air conditioning in her cabin was too strong. She smiled a sad smile, thanked me, and left. I thought it was a simple case of loneliness or nighttime confusion, common in elderly people out of their element. The next night, at the same time, she came back. Same robe, same slippers. "It's colder. It's getting colder," she whispered, and her fingers, when they touched mine, were cold, despite the normal temperature on the thermometer. Once more, I checked everything. Nothing. "What's your cabin number, Mrs. Gable? I can have maintenance check your air conditioning tomorrow." 8240, she replied, before turning and walking away. On the third night, I waited for her. Her punctuality was as precise as a Swiss watch. The same ritual, the same complaint, the same unexplained chill. I began to feel genuinely concerned. Maybe it was something neurological, something our simple onboard equipment couldn't detect. I decided that the next morning I would check her medical history on the passenger manifest and perhaps speak to the chief physician. I tried to remember the name of the anti-anxiety medication that Dr. Evans had recommended for patients with acute anxiety. It was what was the brand name again? The one that started with X. Oh yes, Xanax. I needed one myself. The next morning, with a strong cup of coffee in my hand, I opened the system on my computer. I typed in the name, Gable. No results. I tried variations, Gabble, Gable. Nothing. I felt a chill. I looked up the cabin number she had given me, 8240. The system displayed the information in clear red letters. Cabin unoccupied, under maintenance on this voyage. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. How was this possible? A ghost passenger? An elderly stowaway living in an empty cabin? Logical explanations began to fight with the irrational fear in my head. Maybe she was a relative of a crew member, sleeping in an unregistered place. Maybe she was confused and gave me the wrong number. But what about her name? Why was it nowhere to be found? I followed a line of photographer Diane Arbus. A photograph is a secret about a secret. The more it tells you, the less you know. Mrs. Gable was like that. Each visit, instead of giving me answers, only deepened the mystery. I was looking at something, but I couldn't see it. On the fourth night, I didn't wait in the infirmary. I went up to the 8th floor. The hallway was silent, lined with the ship's hideous patterned carpet. I found cabin 8240. The door was closed, with a small out-of-order sign hanging from the doorknob. I put my ear to the door. Silence. No sound of air conditioning. No light beneath the crack. The cabin was dead. But when I touched the wood, it was cold. Unnaturally cold. It seemed to suck the heat from my hand. There was no visitor that night or the next. Mrs. Gable disappeared as silently as she had appeared. I should have felt relief, but what I felt was a growing dread. The unsolved mystery was worse than her visit. On the last day at sea, before we docked in Miami, curiosity got the better of me. I used my emergency MasterCard to open the door to 8240. The air that came out was cold, like a freezer. The cabin was empty, the furniture covered with white sheets, just as a room in repair should be. There was no sign that anyone had been there, except for one thing. On the floor beside the covered bed was a single faded silk slipper. It was identical to the one Mrs. Gable had been wearing. I slammed the door and ran. I landed in Miami and resigned by email the same day. To this day, I wonder, who was she? A delirium caused by loneliness and the sound of the sea, or something more? A ship is a floating city, a place of passage for thousands of people. Who really controls who enters and who leaves? How many stories live and die in the corridors, invisible to the official records? We worry about storms and accidents, but what about the passengers who are not on the list? What if the ship is not just a vehicle, but a place that carries its own permanent inhabitants? Perhaps the real fear is not what might happen on the high seas, but who is already on board, waiting patiently in the dark, feeling a cold that no one can cure. I always thought it was ironic that you would pay a fortune to disconnect on a cruise, only to spend the whole day searching for a decent Wi-Fi signal. You escape the routine, but you take your electronic leash with you. My name is Sam, and after selling my software startup, I needed some time away from screens and notifications, radiance of the seas. It seemed like the perfect cure. 7 days of no emails, no deadlines, just the ocean. It was a good plan until I encountered a screen I couldn't ignore. It was the third day in Cozumel. The ship docked, and most of the passengers disembarked to buy tequila and trinkets. I preferred to stay on the beach near the port, snorkeling. The water was clear, full of colorful fish. That's when I saw it. Stuck in a coral about 3 meters deep was a small action camera, one of those waterproof ones. A little red light blinked weakly, a sign that the battery was almost dead. I looked around. No one. With a little effort, I managed to free it. My first thought was noble, to find the owner. My second, more honest, was pure curiosity. Back in my cabin, I dried off the camera and plugged it into my laptop. There were dozens of video files. The first few were exactly what I expected. A young couple, Mark and Chloe, as I could tell from her excited squeals. They were perfect vacation videos. They filmed boarding, the cabin, their first dinner. Chloe had an infectious smile, and Mark, always behind the camera, seemed devoted to her. She reminded me vaguely of an actress. What's the name of the one who did the CIA movie? The redhead. Oh, yes, Jessica Chastain. I kept watching. The tone began to shift subtly. Videos of Chloe smiling gave way to long takes of her sleeping. Mark began to narrate the videos in whispers when she couldn't hear. "She doesn't understand how fragile this place is," he said in one clip as he filmed the ship's wake cutting through the black ocean. "She thinks it's just a vacation." His paranoia was a slowly rising tide. He began filming empty hallways, the cleaning crew, other passengers, as if searching for a threat only he could see. I felt like an intruder, a voyeur of something private and dark. I follow the philosopher Susan Sontag's line. To photograph someone is to commit a form of violence. And there, in the silence of my booth, watching the intimacy of that couple fall apart, I felt like I was violating the scene of a crime before it even happened. The fear wasn't of a monster or a ghost. The fear was Mark. I stayed up all night, clicking from one file to the next. Mark's obsession grew. He started talking about the noise, a low humming sound he said the ship made at night that put ideas in people's heads. He filmed his cabin door for 20 minutes straight, convinced someone was outside. Chloe, in the few clips where she was awake, looked tired. Her infectious smile was gone, replaced by a worried expression. She tried to calm him down, telling him it was just the ship's engine and that he needed to relax. Then I got to the last file. It was called promise.mp4. It was dated 2 days before I found the camera. The image was shaky, it was dark. It was Mark, filming himself in selfie mode on the upper deck. The wind whipped the microphone. "She finally understands," he whispered, his eyes wide and euphoric. "There's no escaping the noise, but there is a way to keep her safe forever. I promised I'd take care of her." He turned the camera. Chloe was standing by the railing, her back to him, staring into the dark abyss of the ocean. She didn't seem to be struggling or afraid. She was strangely still, almost in a trance. "Chloe?" he called, his voice soft. She didn't turn around. The camera shook violently. There was a muffled sound, a dull thud, followed by silence broken only by the wind and the distant sound of the ship's engine. Mark said nothing more. The camera pointed downward at his own shaking hands for about 30 seconds. Then the video ended. I sat on my bed, paralyzed. I had just witnessed a murder. My palms were sweating. What was I supposed to do? Go to the captain? Hand over the camera? Was I a witness, a suspect? Would they believe me? I grabbed my phone and with shaking hands searched for news. Missing woman, man overboard, the name of the ship. Nothing, no alerts, no missing passengers. For the radiance of the seas, Chloe was no more, and apparently she never had been. On the last day, as the ship approached Miami, I went up to the top deck. I found the exact spot from the video. The ocean looked calm, indifferent. I held the small camera in my hand. It was the only proof that Chloe had existed and that her end had been terrible. It was a nightmare that wasn't mine, but that now lived inside me. What do you do with a secret like that? Do you carry it, let it poison you, or do you throw it back into the abyss from whence it came? Does every tragedy need to be told, or is silence sometimes a form of peace? I looked at the camera, then at the vastness of the water, and I made my decision. I've always thought that cruise ship architecture is an honest lie. They try to imitate luxury hotels on dry land, but the walls are too thin and the floor vibrates in a subtle way that never lets you forget that you're actually inside a giant machine floating in the void. My name is Thomas, and after I retired from my architecture practice, my wife Sarah insisted that we needed a real vacation. No plans, no stress. We ended up on the grandeur of the waves. The ship was a maze of opulence and bad taste. In a secluded hallway near the library, there was an oil painting that caught my eye. It was a banal seascape, probably bought by the pound. A stormy night, a lonely lighthouse on a cliff, and the sea raging. Cliché, but there was something about the composition that made me stop and stare every time I passed by. On the third night, I noticed something different. In the small window at the top of the lighthouse, there seemed to be a tiny spot of yellow paint that I didn't remember seeing. A tiny light. I ignored it. It must have been a trick of the hallway lighting or of my memory, which was no longer the same. I tried to remember the name of that hyper-realist painter I admired, the one who painted lonely diners. What was his name? That American? Oh yes, Edward Hopper. The painting of the ship was a cheap copy of that feeling of loneliness. The next day I passed by again. The yellow spot was clearer, and it wasn't just a light. Inside, it was a silhouette, a tiny, almost toothpick-shaped figure standing in the lighthouse window. "Sarah, come look at this," I called to my wife when I found her in the library. She followed me, a little impatiently. "What's wrong, Tom?" "The painting. Look, there's a man in the lighthouse window. I swear he wasn't there yesterday." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Honey, it's a painting. There's no one there. It's just smudges of paint. You're bored. Let's go get a drink." She kissed me on the cheek and walked away, leaving me staring at the canvas. Her condescension irritated me, but it also planted the seed of doubt. Was I making things up? I pulled out my phone and took a clear picture of the painting. Proof. That night, I felt uneasy. I went to the quiet lounge across from the painting hall. I ordered a whiskey and watched from afar. I followed the advice of filmmaker David Lynch. The world is as strange as it is wild at its core. Standing there, staring at this mediocre work of art on a cruise ship, I felt that strangeness didn't need monsters or ghosts. It lived in the wrong details of normality. After 2 whiskeys, I gathered my courage and walked back into the hallway. My heart sank. The figure was no longer in the lighthouse window. Now it was outside, on the rocky cliff, dangerously close to the crashing waves. It was larger, more detailed. It wore a dark coat, and it seemed to be looking directly at me. I ran back to my cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was already asleep. I grabbed my phone, went to the photo gallery, and opened the image I had taken earlier. The screen of my phone lit up my anxious face. In the photo, the painting was exactly as I had first seen it. The lighthouse was dark. There was no light. There was no figure. There was nothing. A chill ran down my spine. It was me. It was in my head. Hallucination, stress, the whiskey. Any explanation was better than the truth forming in the back of my mind. I needed to see it with my own eyes one more time. I walked back into the hallway. My legs felt like lead. I prayed to find the painting empty, to prove that my mind was playing tricks on me. I stopped in front of the canvas. The figure was no longer on the cliff. It was at the base of the lighthouse, in the small doorway, and it was no longer a silhouette. The artist, whoever he was, had painted a face, the face I saw every day in the mirror. It was me, wearing the same blue polo shirt I was wearing at that very moment. It was a perfect, terrifying portrait of me, trapped inside that nightmarish landscape. I took a step back, bumping into the opposite wall. The air rushed out of me. It wasn't a painting, it was a mirror, a diary, a trap. I didn't return to that hallway for the rest of the trip. I avoided the 7th floor like it was a contaminated area. Sarah noticed my strange behavior, but I made up an excuse about feeling sick. How could I explain it? On the day of disembarkation, as I walked down the gangplank, I looked back at the imposing white mass of the grandeur of the waves. I felt like a part of me was left there. Does art, in its solitude, begin to watch us back? Or do certain places, like a ship isolated in the middle of nowhere, become blank canvases for our deepest fears? The ship didn't steal my image. Perhaps it simply revealed a portrait of my own solitude that I refused to see. The question that haunts me now that I'm back on dry land is, how many parts of ourselves do we leave behind in the places we've been? Trapped in a painting, in a mirror, in a memory, waiting for the next lonely person to stop and look. I've always thought that cruise ship safety is a performance. Cameras everywhere, smiling crew, everything to make you forget that the deck railings are low and the ocean is very, very big. I'm a data analyst. My name is Clara, and my job is to find patterns in chaos. I decided to take a solo vacation on the Caribbean Empress to clear my mind after a hellish project. I just wanted silence. Little did I know that silence would be the last thing I would get. It all started with small, almost imperceptible things. Things you dismiss as your own distraction. On the second day, I returned to my cabin, and the book I had left on the bed was on the desk. I must have moved it, and I don't remember, I thought. The next morning, I woke up shivering. The air conditioning thermostat, which I always kept at 72 degrees, was turned all the way down, freezing the room. I blamed the maid. It's easy to find logical explanations when the alternative is too daunting. The first real break in logic came on the fourth day. I had a small wooden music box, an inexpensive souvenir I had bought at the Port of St. Thomas for my mother. I had kept it in my suitcase, which was padlocked. When I came back from dinner, the suitcase was still locked, but the music box was on my pillow. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a robbery. This was a break-in. Someone with a master key or something was breaking into my room, opening my locked luggage, and toying with me. I went straight to the security desk. The officer, a man with a badge that said, what was his name? Something with D. Donovan? No. Oh yes, D'Angelo. Officer D'Angelo listened to me with practiced patience, took down the details, and said they would look into it. His tone made it clear what he thought. A woman traveling alone, probably starved for attention or paranoid. I felt helpless, humiliated. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship was the sound of someone trying the doorknob. I sat up in bed, staring at the door until dawn. The next day, fear became a physical presence. I felt watched everywhere, in the crowded restaurant, on the pool deck. Any look that lingered a second longer was his. Hell, I realized, was not fire and brimstone. I follow Jean-Paul Sartre's line, hell is other people. And there, surrounded by hundreds of smiling faces, I was in my own private hell, because any one of them could be my devil. The psychological torture escalated. I began to receive notes slipped under the cabin door. They weren't threats, which was even worse. They were observations. The red dress looks great on you. You've barely touched your lunch today. Is everything okay? He wasn't just checking up on me. He wanted me to know that I was being watched. Each note was a new layer of terror, proof that my privacy was an illusion and that there was nowhere to run. The entire ship had become a cage. The height of the horror, the moment that shattered what was left of my sanity, came the night before last. I needed a hot shower to try to calm my frazzled nerves. I locked the stall door, checked the closet, and then under the bed. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the hot water and steam engulf me. For a moment, I closed my eyes and almost felt safe. That's when the bathroom lights flickered and went out. I stood frozen in the pitch black, the water still pouring down on me. My heart stopped, and then I heard it. Over the sound of the shower, an unmistakable noise. Click, soft, metallic sound of the cabin door closing. Someone was there, in the room, just a few feet away from me, while I stood vulnerable in the dark. A scream caught my throat. I turned off the water, grabbed a towel, and, shaking uncontrollably, left the bathroom. The room was empty. The door was locked as I had left it. I would have believed I had imagined the whole thing, if not for one thing. On the bathroom mirror, fogged with steam, someone had written a single word with their finger. Hello. I didn't sleep anymore. I pushed the desk against the door and sat on the floor, hugging my knees, until the sun came up. As soon as the ship docked, I was one of the first to disembark. I didn't look back. To this day, the question gnaws at me. Who was it? Why? I wasn't robbed. I wasn't physically assaulted. I was erased. My safety, my sanity, my trust in the world, it was all methodically stolen for sport. Does everyone have a threshold for fear? And what happens when someone decides to push you beyond your own just to watch you fall? I'll never know who the face in the crowd was, and that's the part that really sends chills down my spine. The ship has sailed, but I feel like a part of me is still there, locked in that cabin, waiting for the next click on the door. I've always thought that cruise ship safety is a performance. Cameras everywhere, smiling crew, everything to make you forget that the deck railings are low and the ocean is very, very big. I'm a data analyst. My name is Clara, and my job is to find patterns in chaos. I decided to take a solo vacation on the Caribbean Empress to clear my mind after a hellish project. I just wanted silence. Little did I know that silence would be the last thing I would get. It all started with small, almost imperceptible things. Things you dismiss as your own distraction. On the second day, I returned to my cabin, and the book I had left on the bed was on the desk. I must have moved it, and I don't remember, I thought. The next morning, I woke up shivering. The air conditioning thermostat, which I always kept at 72 degrees, was turned all the way down, freezing the room. I blamed the maid. It's easy to find logical explanations when the alternative is too daunting. The first real break in logic came on the fourth day. I had a small wooden music box, an inexpensive souvenir I had bought at the Port of St. Thomas for my mother. I had kept it in my suitcase, which was padlocked. When I came back from dinner, the suitcase was still locked, but the music box was on my pillow. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a robbery. This was a break-in. Someone with a master key or something was breaking into my room, opening my locked luggage, and toying with me. I went straight to the security desk. The officer, a man with a badge that said, what was his name? Something with Donovan? No. Oh yes, D'Angelo. Officer D'Angelo listened to me with practiced patience, took down the details, and said they would look into it. His tone made it clear what he thought. A woman traveling alone, probably starved for attention or paranoid. I felt helpless, humiliated. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship was the sound of someone trying the doorknob. I sat up in bed, staring at the door until dawn. The next day, fear became a physical presence. I felt watched everywhere, in the crowded restaurant, on the pool deck. Any look that lingered a second longer was his. Hell, I realized, was not fire and brimstone. I follow Jean-Paul Sartre's line, hell is other people. And there, surrounded by hundreds of smiling faces, I was in my own private hell, because any one of them could be my devil. The psychological torture escalated. I began to receive notes slipped under the cabin door. They weren't threats, which was even worse. They were observations. The red dress looks great on you. You've barely touched your lunch today. Is everything okay? He wasn't just checking up on me. He wanted me to know that I was being watched. Each note was a new layer of terror, proof that my privacy was an illusion and that there was nowhere to run. The entire ship had become a cage. The height of the horror, the moment that shattered what was left of my sanity, came the night before last. I needed a hot shower to try to calm my frazzled nerves. I locked the stall door, checked the closet, and then under the bed. I went into the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the hot water and steam engulf me. For a moment, I closed my eyes and almost felt safe. That's when the bathroom lights flickered and went out. I stood frozen in the pitch black, the water still pouring down on me. My heart stopped, and then I heard it. Over the sound of the shower, an unmistakable noise. Click, soft, metallic sound of the cabin door closing. Someone was there, in the room, just a few feet away from me, while I stood vulnerable in the dark. A scream caught my throat. I turned off the water, grabbed a towel, and, shaking uncontrollably, left the bathroom. The room was empty. The door was locked as I had left it. I would have believed I had imagined the whole thing, if not for one thing. On the bathroom mirror, fogged with steam, someone had written a single word with their finger. Hello. I didn't sleep anymore. I pushed the desk against the door and sat on the floor, hugging my knees until the sun came up. As soon as the ship docked, I was one of the first to disembark. I didn't look back. To this day, the question gnaws at me. Who was it? Why? I wasn't robbed. I wasn't physically assaulted. I was erased. My safety, my sanity, my trust in the world, it was all methodically stolen for sport. Does everyone have a threshold for fear? And what happens when someone decides to push you beyond your own just to watch you fall? I'll never know who the face in the crowd was, and that's the part that really sends chills down my spine. The ship has sailed, but I feel like a part of me is still there, locked in that cabin, waiting for the next click on the door. I always thought that every cruise ship had two versions. The one they sell you, with its blue pools and endless buffets, and the other, the real thing, a maze of gray steel and narrow corridors hidden behind doors marked crew only. A floating city has to have its slums, its underworld. I just didn't think I'd get to visit it. My name is Alex. I'm a photojournalist, and I was on the Odyssey of the stars. To forget about an agenda that went terribly wrong. By the third night, the party on the upper deck was in full swing. I had drunk more than I should have. Around 2 a.m, I decided to head back to my cabin. The ship seemed to be rocking more, or maybe it was just my head. In a hallway that I swore was my own, I pushed open a heavy door that I thought was a shortcut. The door had no handle on the inside. It closed behind me with a final metallic click. The world changed in an instant. The colorful carpet gave way to non-slip metal flooring. Warm LED lights were replaced by buzzing fluorescents that cast a sickly pale glow. The air smelled of diesel, grease, and bleach. The muffled sounds of the party were drowned out by the deep, steady rumble of engines, a vibration that pierced your bones. I was in the belly of the beast. At first, I didn't panic. I thought I could just find another door and go back to the passenger world, but every hallway was identical. Gray, and more gray, unmarked metal doors. I turned right, then left. Nothing looked familiar. My cabin was on deck 8. No, the pizza place was on 8. Mine was near that bar called, what was it? The Schooner Bar. Deck 6? Yes, deck 6. But down here, the numbers meant nothing. Panic began to bubble as the first crewman passed me. A short man in a mechanic's uniform carrying a toolbox. "Excuse me," I called, relieved. "I think I got lost." He didn't slow down. He didn't look at me. He walked past me as if I were a pillar of support, an inanimate object in his path. I stood there confused. Maybe he didn't speak English. A few minutes later, 2 women in cleaning uniforms came from the opposite direction, talking in a language I didn't recognize. I waved, tried to get their attention. They saw me. I know they did. Their eyes passed over me and continued, the conversation never missing a beat. They ignored me with practiced absolute efficiency. That's when the real fear began. It wasn't that I was lost. It was that to them, I wasn't there. I wandered through that maze for an unfathomable amount of time. An hour? 3? Time down here didn't pass, it just accumulated. Indifference was a rule, a law. Every crew member who passed me, and there were many, put on the same spectacle of denial. They stared through me with blank eyes, focused on their fate. I was a bug in the system, an anomaly to be ignored until it corrected itself or disappeared. I followed the thinking of the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who wrote about the banality of evil. There, in those steely depths, I understood the banality of indifference. It didn't take hatred to dehumanize someone. It was enough to refuse to acknowledge their existence. To them, I was no longer a passenger. I was a piece out of place. Desperately, my throat dry, I tried the doors. Most of them were locked. Finally, one opened onto a small pantry, a claustrophobic break room. A man sat at a table, eating something that looked like stew from a plastic bowl. He was young, no older than 20. "Please," I said, my voice hoarse, "help me. I'm lost." He looked up from his plate. His eyes didn't hold the hostility I expected, or the surprise. They held a deep, abysmal weariness. He stared at me for about 5 seconds, a heavy silence filling the small space. Then, slowly, he picked up his fork, lifted a mouthful of stew to his mouth, chewed, and looked back at the wall in front of him. I had been dismissed from the human race. That was my breaking point. The terror was no longer about being lost. It was about being abandoned by my own kind. What would they do if I passed out there? Would they walk all over me? I broke into a run, the sound of my shoes echoing in the metal corridors. I screamed, banged on doors, a caged animal. Finally, at a dead end, I found a spiral staircase that led down to an even noisier area where the garbage was processed. A thin young man who seemed frightened by my shouting pointed to a cargo door at the end of the platform. "Emergency exit," he muttered in broken English before quickly walking away. The door spat me out into a service corridor on deck 3. From there, I found an elevator and returned to my world of carpets and pipe music. No one noticed my deplorable state, the sweat, the paleness. I went to my cabin, locked the door, and didn't come out until disembarkation. How much of our luxurious reality is built on an invisible underworld with its own cruel rules? What happens to the person who falls through the cracks of this system? I saw the real map of the ship, not the one they give to tourists, but the social map, with its borders and its zones where humanity is suspended. The question that sends shivers down my spine is, if that boy hadn't helped me, how long would it have been before I simply stopped being? I've always thought that the most tiring part of a cruise isn't the sun, but the obligatory friendliness. Smile at your table mate at dinner, strike up a conversation in the elevator, join in on bingo night. For someone like me, who finds solace in the silence of books, it's like running a social marathon every day. My name is Ryan. I'm a librarian, and the cruise on the Anthem of the Seas. It was supposed to be my refuge. 7 days with nothing but detective novels and the sound of the sea. The tranquility ended on the 4th day. It started as a rumor that spread through the ship like a virus. An expensive diamond necklace had been stolen from the presidential suite on my floor. The victim was a wealthy widow who everyone saw parading her jewelry at dinner. The ship suddenly felt smaller. The holiday atmosphere was replaced by a haze of suspicion. At first, I didn't care. It was just a drama for the other passengers to comment on. Until there was a knock on my door. It was two of the ship's security officers. Their boss, a burly man with a face that looked permanently disillusioned with the world, asked to be let in. The questions began in a friendly manner. Where had I been the night before? Had I seen anyone suspicious in the hallway? I answered honestly. I had just come from the magic show. No, it was the theater with the musical. That was it. Then I went to the bar at, what's the name of that one on the main deck? The Boleros. I got a drink and went back to the cabin to read. The officer's tone changed. He said I had been seen prowling the hallway around the time of the robbery. I tried to explain that my cabin was 2 doors down from the suite, that I was just returning to my room, but he looked at me in a way that made me feel dirty. He asked about my work, my salary. He was painting a portrait, and I was a canvas. The lonely librarian, the quiet, invisible man, the perfect scapegoat. I felt naked under the weight of his judgment. I remembered a quote I had once read. I follow Franz Kafka's line in The Trial. It seemed as if shame would survive him. I had done absolutely nothing, but shame had already swallowed me. It was more real and heavier than my own innocence. The nightmare became reality the next morning. The security chief, with 2 other officers, returned with a search warrant for my cabin, an order issued by the captain. Here, in international waters, his word was law. They made me stand in the corner of the room while they rummaged through my few belongings with brutal efficiency. They opened my books, shaking the pages. They unpacked my suitcase. They ripped the lining of my coat. And of course they found it. One of the officers, with a rehearsed air of triumph, reached into an inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the diamond necklace. The jewel glinted in the artificial light of the cabin, a serpent of light that sealed my fate. The shock left me breathless. It was impossible. I had never seen that necklace in my life. I looked at the satisfied face of the security chief and understood. This was not an investigation, it was theater. And I was the main actor, the only one who didn't know the script. I was confined to my cabin for the rest of the voyage, with a guard posted at the door. I would be handed over to the police at the next port. From my small round window, I watched the ocean pass by, indifferent. I was trapped in a lie. Who had done this? The owner herself for an insurance scam? The real thief who needed someone to blame? Or worse, one of the security guards themselves? I would never know. My version of the truth no longer mattered. As the ship approached the shore, the end of my freedom materializing on the horizon, one question consumed me. What is truth when the whole world decides to believe a lie? Does it simply disappear? I had entered that ship as Ryan the librarian. I would leave it as Ryan the thief. My identity, the only thing I truly owned, had been stolen and replaced with a fiction more convenient to them. The ship has its own laws, its own reality. And when that reality decides you are the villain, there is no appeal, no jury, no escape. The real terror is not being accused of a crime. It is knowing that you are innocent and having to watch helplessly as your life is unraveled piece by piece by a story that was never yours. I've always thought that the bridge of a ship is both the quietest and the noisiest place at the same time. Quiet, because no one dares to speak without a good reason. Noisy because of the invisible weight of the thousands of lives that depend on every decision made there. It's a responsibility that ages you. My name is Ben, and as third officer and the navigator of the seas, my job was to follow orders and make sure the ship's path on the map matched our path in the ocean. The captain was Arthur Evans, a legend in the fleet. A man with more than 30 years at sea, his calm was as vast as the Pacific itself. But on that voyage from California to Hawaii, the captain's calm began to show cracks. It was small things. He would forget the names of crew members he had known for years. He would give a course order only to contradict it minutes later. One night, I saw him standing in front of the radar for nearly 10 minutes, as if he didn't recognize the symbols he saw every day. We junior officers would whisper to each other, "He's tired," we would say. "Retirement is coming." The excuse of fatigue ran out during a storm off the coast. The protocol was clear: slow down and sail against the waves to maintain stability. Instead, Evans ordered a slight turn, exposing the ship's flank to a dangerous swell. The first officer, a man named whom I greatly respected, questioned the order with the utmost deference. "Captain, this maneuver increases the risk of—" Evans interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it was as hard as steel. "Are you questioning a direct order from me, First Officer?" The silence that followed was absolute. The order had been carried out. The ship listed violently. Dishes shattered in the restaurants 2 floors below, and panic reigned on the bridge for a long minute before we steadied. The captain showed no emotion. He just stared straight ahead as if nothing had happened. That night, as I recorded the incident in my logbook, I tried to remember the exact number of the maritime regulation that the captain's authority was under. Was it Solus Code, Chapter 5, Rule 19? No, that was about equipment. Oh yes, Rule 34. The one that says the captain's decision is final and scary. The fear on the bridge was palpable in the days that followed. The crew walked on tiptoe. Captain Evans seemed to have recovered his legendary calm back in place, which was almost more frightening. The calm before the storm indeed. I follow the historian Lord Acton's line: power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We had given one man absolute power over 3,000 souls, and we were witnessing the corruption not of morals, but of the mind itself. It happened on my watch, in the dead of night, halfway to Hawaii. The sea was calm, the sky starry. I was monitoring the systems when I noticed something on the long-range radar. A supercarrier, a steel monster heading our way. Our current course was safe. We would pass within several nautical miles. But then a notification flashed on the screen. New route scheduled. A slight, almost imperceptible change in course. But it was a change that, in 45 minutes, would put us on a direct collision course. I checked the log. The change had been made manually from the captain's terminal. No warning, no explanation. I radioed the first officer. No answer. I called his quarters. No answer. I ran to the captain's quarters and knocked on the door. Silence. The door was locked from the inside. I walked back to the bridge, cold sweat running down my spine. The blip on the radar was bigger. 30 minutes to go. The rules were clear. The hierarchy was absolute. To disobey would be the end of my career, an act of mutiny. But to obey would be the end of everything. Thousands of people sleeping in their beds, trusting us, trusting the man who had just sentenced us to death. With shaking hands, I took manual control of the helm. I disengaged the captain's autopilot and steered the ship away from the collision course. Every second was agony, the proximity alarm siren screaming on the silent bridge. When it was all over and the freighter passed us like a floating building in the darkness, security finally managed to break down the captain's door. He was sitting in his chair, unharmed, staring blankly at the wall. He had suffered a massive silent stroke. I saved the ship and ruined my life. The cruise line hushed up the incident. The official version was navigation computer failure. I was privately praised and then quietly transferred to a desk job in Miami. My career at sea was over. Who watches the watchman? We have created systems and protocols to protect us from human error, but nothing can protect us when the error happens at the top of the pyramid. I did the right thing, and the system punished me for exposing its most terrifying flaw. The real terror is not the ocean out there. It is the fragility of the human mind that commands it, and the corporate silence that does everything it can to ensure that the passengers never know how close. That night, we all came to the end